Good evening. If you're lying down right now, if your feet feel like stones and your mind still spins like a wheel begging for oil, let me take you back, not far, just 700 years or so. Back to a small village tucked in the southern woods of France, where the morning fog hung thick enough to drown the sound of roosters, and where every dawn began with the same rhythm, the sharp, dry strike of a hammer on iron. No poetry, no music, just metal meeting metal like a heartbeat that refused to die. Tonight we begin not with kings or knights or legends sung by firelight, but with a man named Theo. He wasn't noble, wasn't a soldier, wasn't drawn into history books, and yet every blade you've ever imagined, every gate that held through winter, every horseshoe that carried cavalry into battle passed through the fire of his forge. He was a blacksmith, and while his name may have disappeared with time, the sound of his hammer still echoes beneath every hinge that doesn't creak. You've seen blacksmiths before on screen, perhaps. The slow-motion scene, glowing iron hammers, falling sparks, blooming like fireworks. It looks heroic, beautiful, even inspiring. But trust me, being a real blacksmith in the 13th century was nothing like that. It was filthy, it was brutal, it blistered your skin, swallowed your lungs in soot, and shaped your back into a question mark long before your hair turned grey. It was not a calling. It was survival, loud, hot, thankless survival. Nobody wrote songs for men like Theo. He wore no crest. No one painted him. But imagine this without horseshoes the knights walked. Without swords the lords pleaded. Without hinges the castle doors would fall in the autumn wind. The blacksmith was unnamed, but his fingerprints were on everything that held the world together. So before we begin, turn down your lights. Let the room dim. Turn on a small fan if you have one. The hum will sound just like cold breathing in the belly of a forge. And let me tell you a story. Not of glory, not of war, but of one life lived fully in smoke and iron. The life of a man who never asked for thanks, who never stopped working, and who may have saved the world 100 times without anyone knowing. His name was Theo. The year was 1264, and his forge is still warm tonight, waiting for you. Are you ready? Because the fire has just begun to whisper in the dark. Imagine this. You are Theo. And from here, your story begins. You were born on a night so cold the wind didn't whistle, it scraped. It clawed at wooden shutters, slid its fingers under every doorframe, pressed against stone walls like it was hunting warmth to swallow. The sky was black. The fields were frozen hard enough to crack the hooves of careless horses. And inside the forge, because it wasn't really a house, only a smithy with a bed stuffed into the corner, your mother screamed. There was no midwife. The only one in the village had gone to another birth days ago and never came back. So it was your grandmother who took over. Her hands were cracked like dry bark, knotted and strong. She boiled water over the forge fire, not a hearth, not a kitchen flame, but the same fire that had melted iron that very morning. The room stank of soot and oil of leather smoked for too many winters of iron filings, and ancient sweat soaked into every beam. It wasn't a place to be born. And yet, there you were. Your father stood by the door, motionless fists, bald, tight shoulders, hunched like he expected to be struck. His face was already blackened from the day's labour. His hammer still rested near the anvil, the metal still warm. The birth had come fast. He didn't know where to stand. He knew how to shape steel, not hold something fragile. So he stayed back, eyes locked on the woman trying to bring you into the world, breath shallow, like a man watching his forge flicker. Your grandmother muttered old words, half prayer, half curse, as she threw herbs into the fire-rubbed salt into the cracks of the floorboards, and waved a bundle of dried sage through the air. He'll breathe flame before he breathes air, she whispered. Could be a blessing, could be a warning. Your mother bit down on a scrap of leather torn from your father's apron. Her hands gripped the wooden bed frame as if trying to bend it back into a tree. Her hair was soaked. Her mouth was silent. But her whole body was screaming. And then you arrived. You didn't cry. Not at first. You were small, clenched tight, slick with heat and blood as if you'd been pulled straight from the coals. But your grandmother wasn't alarmed. She slapped your back, breathed across your face, rubbed you with hands that had caught 8 grandchildren. And then you wailed. Loud, sharp, defiant. At that exact moment a gust slammed into the forge's chimney and knocked a shower of soot from above. It drifted down like ash snow and landed on your forehead. No one wiped it off. Your grandmother looked at you and nodded once. The forge has marked him, she said. He's not going anywhere else. That night your mother held you in a wool blanket that smelled faintly of burned hair and metal. She was pale, spent, but still breathing. She looked at the forge glowing across the room, looked back at your coal-streaked face and whispered your name, Theo. And that name stayed in the stone, in the soot in the walls. It didn't leave. No one remembers what moon hung in the sky that night. No one remembers what the fire was burning oak pine, maybe scraps from an old cart axle. But they all remembered the colour of the flame. It wasn't golden. It was dark. Old. The kind of fire that doesn't dance, it waits. Watches. Decides. From that moment on, the forge never left you. Not in your dreams. Not during the rare spring mornings when the coals lay quiet. Not even in those first moments of play when other children chased chickens and threw stones while you watched sparks. You didn't learn to walk on grass, you learned to walk between buckets of water and piles of iron. You didn't fear heat. You feared cold. You picked up your first bent nail like a child finds treasure. You burned your fingers and didn't flinch. The smoke clung to your skin longer than any lullaby. You weren't born in a forge. You were forged. I hope you like the smell of old sweat trapped in never-dry wool, the stench of scorched leather, the smoke that lives in your hair like a ghost, and 70 years of joints aching in places you didn't know had names. Because if you think you'd get a few quiet years of childhood before the hammer fell on your life, think again. In the medieval world, childhood wasn't a phase, it was a misunderstanding. And if you were born to a blacksmith, it was a misunderstanding, corrected the moment you lifted a bucket of slag without spilling it on your own feet. You didn't step into the trade, you stumbled into it. There was no ceremony, no celebration. Just your father, shirtless and soot-covered his face, a permanent scowl carved from decades of heat and taxes glancing sideways from the forge and grunting, "Stoke it." And that was it. That was the moment your childhood got officially revoked. From that day on, you weren't the boy who sat in the corner waiting for soup. You were the boy who fetched the coal, fanned the bellows, sorted the tools, and swept the floor without asking where the dust was supposed to go, because the answer was always away from the fire. And if you asked too many questions, the hammer might answer for you. Your official title was apprentice, which is medieval for do everything no one else wants to do and still get yelled at. You learned to tell the temperature of iron by how close you could get without crying. You learned the sound of your father's silence, and the difference between quiet and angry quiet. You learned that gloves were a luxury, blisters were a lesson, and that pain had layers, the kind that blister, the kind that sting, and the kind that settle into your bones like unwanted tenants. You once whispered to yourself, do blacksmiths get days off? And the smoke laughed. A day off from what? Keeping the village from falling apart. You could take a day off, sure. If you were okay with your mother hauling the bellows with a limp, if you were fine with your baby brother going hungry because no one fixed the farmer's plough, if you were cool with being replaced, you learned to breathe in soot like air. You learned to sleep through hammering. You learned to feel pride in a nail driven straight and shame in one that bent wrong. You didn't get paid, you got fed, and not always. If you were lucky, you'd get a piece of bread and a nod. If you were really lucky, your father would make a sound that almost sounded like approval. In blacksmith language that translates to, you didn't completely ruin it. You developed strange little habits. You tapped the anvil twice before each strike like saying hello. You sniffed your left sleeve before each day for no reason you could name. You counted your father's hammer strikes to guess his mood, and when he got to 6 and still hadn't shouted, you let yourself breathe. You never played. Unless you count trying to catch sparks with your eyelids. You had no toys. Unless you count the broken tongs you practiced with in secret. You had no dreams. Unless you count the ones where you're finally strong enough to swing the real hammer and don't mess it up. You once cried, quietly, when your fingers split open after a long day. Your father didn't scold you. He handed you a bowl of cold ash water and said soak it. It burned, then it numbed. And somehow you understood no one here has time to comfort you. They only have time to keep you alive. You slept beside the forge. Not because it was warm, because that's where you felt real. The fire hummed you to sleep. The sparks flickered like fireflies you were never allowed to chase. And in your dreams you never left the forge, even when you tried. You forgot what silence sounded like. You forgot what clean felt like. You forgot you were still small because the hammer didn't care. Eventually your hands stopped blistering, your arms stopped trembling, and your eyes stopped tearing from the smoke. That's how the forge welcomes you. Not with open arms, but with open flame. And if you can stand in it long enough, it doesn't burn you anymore. It just becomes you. Time in a blacksmith's life is a vague thing. No calendars, no birthdays, no chalk lines on the wall like the noble kids had, measuring each inch of childhood like a prized crop. You knew you were growing when the leather apron that once brushed your shins now stopped above your knees. It used to be soft, foldable, warm. You could crumple it and use it as a pillow during midday breaks. Now, it was a slab of history, stiff as bark, darkened by years of soot sweat and quenched regret. It cracked when you bent it, smelled like burnt wool soaked in old grease and failure. And if you held it too close to your face, it stung your eyes worse than the smoke. You still wore it. Not because it fit, but because it belonged to the version of you that had survived this long. It was a habit, a shield, a second skin, a reminder that you were still here. One quiet morning, with no customers banging at the door, no urgent plough repairs or screeching gate hinges demanding attention, you sat. Rare. And your fingers, without thinking, traced a corner of that apron, one of the old burns around patch stiff like iron. You vaguely remembered that time a spark hit you just right, left a perfect mark. You were 10-11 hard to tell, but you remembered the sting. And you remembered not crying because your father didn't look up. Not long ago, he let you forge something real. Not nails, not horseshoe scraps. He handed you a commission, a sword hilt for the guard captain, a broadhead axe for a northern mercenary, a hinge bigger than your hand for the monastery door up on the ridge. He didn't praise you, he didn't say you're ready, he just pointed, and for the first time you stepped forward without waiting to be told. That fire that morning, it was beautiful. Not warm hearth beautiful, not glow of candlelight beautiful. No, it was a living thing, breathing hard, snarling with heat, flaring orange and blue in bursts like the sky during a storm you're too afraid to name. It danced with your hammer, matched your breath, and when the metal glowed full red, then white at the edges, you felt something inside you rise with it. It was winter outside. The kind of winter that cracked wood, stiffened fingers turned water buckets into silent drums of ice. But not in here. In here the forge pulsed. The coals hissed. And on the stone walls the shadows of you and your fire swayed together like old friends remembering how to fight. You didn't feel cold. You felt chosen. That day you knew something had shifted. Not because someone said so. Not because a celebration was thrown. But because you were the only one close enough to the fire to see its eyes. You remembered how when you were a boy the hammer shook in your hands. Now you struck steel like you were writing your name into it. And when it was over, when the shape held, when the temper took, when the piece cooled without cracking, you didn't smile. But when you scrubbed your hands in ash water afterward and the smell of burnt leather hit your nose, you caught yourself nodding. Just once. Like your father used to. Not out of pride, out of survival. Because somehow without being told you'd crossed the threshold. No one taught you how to love. No one told you the difference between staring too long and getting slapped. Or how to catch someone's eye without looking like a fool with soot on your nose, which of course you were. In your village, people didn't fall in love with sonnets. They fell into it like a ditch on the way home unannounced, inconvenient and covered in manure. Love didn't arrive like spring rain. It slipped in like forge smoke through a broken roof tile, slow hot choking if you weren't careful. You didn't notice it until it was already burning behind your ribs. You met her mid-cuss, one hand gripping a half-finished hammer, the other elbow deep in grease teeth clenched on a leather strap you were biting to hold a rivet still. Your shirt was stiff with sweat, your face hadn't been cleaned since last market day, and your breath probably smelled like iron filings and regret. And that's when she walked in. She didn't carry flowers. She had hands tougher than yours from milking 3 cows every morning and slapping calves off buckets. Her apron was stained with sour milk, and her braid had bits of hay in it. She didn't flutter her lashes. She dropped a broken hoe on your workbench like a sword at the king's feet and said, "Fix it, and don't warp it like last time." You didn't respond. Not because you were speechless, but because you were literally biting down on a rivet. By the time you spit it out, she was halfway to the door. She didn't look back, but her smell a strange mix of cow ash and something stubborn stayed behind like it owned the air. You didn't change overnight. You still smelled like burnt nails, still forgot to blink, still wiped your face with the same sleeve you used to grab the bellows, but you started washing your hands twice, started trimming your fingernails with a file instead of a knife, started checking the mirror well the shiny pan lid just to see if your eyebrows were still singed. You forged her a hook, didn't tell her, just handed it to her younger brother when he passed by, for your sister to hang her cloak or the rope for her cow or whatever. No price, no note. Just the hook bent into the soft curl of a leaf, not because you were a romantic, but because you couldn't stop thinking about the shape of her mouth when she smirked. She didn't thank you, but the next day she passed the forge again. She coughed deliberate fake, the kind of cough you use to make noise without admitting you care. The hoe's still not done. You smiled. Didn't mean to. Just smiled. The kind of smile that happens when a nail bends perfectly instead of snapping. The kind of smile that makes your jaw ache afterward because it's not used to soft things. You didn't call it love. You didn't call it anything. But you found yourself hammering with more rhythm when she was around. Found yourself tempering steel, longer smoothing edges that no one would see but you hoped she'd touch. You never wrote a letter. You forged a bracelet, small, plain, heavy. You didn't say what it meant. She wore it. Didn't ask. When you married her, there was no music, no dancing. Just your father grunting once, your mother muttering about meat prices, and your wife slapping you on the back and saying, "Don't drop me in the mud." Your wedding bed wasn't a bed. Just the old straw by the forge, the same place you napped between hammer strikes. Your body ached. Your hands were filthy. She smelled like goat. You smelled like war. She touched your face like she was wiping soot off the side of a kettle and whispered, "Don't touch me like a blacksmith. Touch me like a man, and if you don't know how that's fine, I'll teach you." That night wasn't sweet. It was sweat and calluses and accidental elbow jabs. It was hilarious. It was awkward. It was real. It was love. You wake up because of ash. Not because someone lit the forge, but because last night's coals weren't properly cleared. What's burning now is a bitter kind of ghost smoke, half embers, half regret, the kind that creeps up from cold fire and clings to the roof of your mouth like a memory nobody asked for. They call it wedding smoke in the village, that strange mix of burnt wood, leftover sweat, and the quiet disappointment of a first night that didn't go like the old songs promised. Your wife isn't in bed anymore. No breath against your shoulder. Just her hair ribbon draped over the edge of the mattress like a message you're supposed to read without opening. You rub your face. Sit up. The first thing you feel is your back. It aches. Not because of the last night, but because the straw mattress is already breaking in, and not in a good way. You've slept better on the forge floor, flat, hard, honest. You don't splash cold water on your face. You take a dipper from the soot-stained pot hanging near the hearth water, slightly warmed by last night's dying fire, and you scrub your face like you're trying to punch sleep off your skull. Outside, the sky isn't fully awake. The rooster's only crowed twice. Somewhere nearby you hear the soft clatter of hooves, your wife feeding the cows. You hear her voice half scolding, half sigh. "Don't step on the trough again, you silly thing." Then the creak of wood, the rustle of hay, the quiet breath of someone who's been up much longer than you. You stand there, shirtless hair still matted with yesterday's sweat, watching the shadow of her crouch by the animals, and suddenly you feel late, like she's always belonged here. Like the rhythm of straw and breath and feeding came before you did, and you're just some man hammering metal in the back room. You head to the forge. The coals are cold, but the fire still needs to be reborn. You crouch down, pull apart the blackened bricks, and blow through the small bellows your father called the smith's spare lungs. Every pump sends a wave of warmth toward your ribs, not fire, yet just heat, like someone is pressing a rough palm to your chest and whispering time to begin. Then the door creaks. She's standing in the frame hay, stuck to her skirt, a smudge of ash on one cheek. She's holding a bowl, porridge barely steaming, a poached egg drifting like a lost sun in the middle. You're coaxing sparks from the kindling when she says, not quite looking at you, "Eat. I didn't season it or anything, but it's warm." You nod. You don't speak. Not because your mouth's full, it's holding a strip of cloth as you loosen a stubborn bolt, but also because you don't know what to say to someone who feeds you without asking first. You barely get 2 gulps of porridge in before the first knock. Not a polite knock. The kind of knock that says, "I know you're in there and I'm about to make that your problem." You spit the last of your breakfast into a rag, wipe your mouth with the back of your wrist, and swing the forge door open, not even fully dressed. It's old Thomas, the shepherd, holding the shattered remains of a gate latch like it personally betrayed him. "Morning," he says, with the tone of someone who thinks morning is a curse. It broke again. Of course it did. You patched it with bent scrap iron 3 months ago because he paid you in a wedge of cheese that turned out to be more mould than dairy. You take the latch. It's useless. Might as well be a spoon. You toss it onto the table and grunt. Come back in the afternoon. He doesn't thank you. Just grumbles something about sheep with no manners and leaves. You finish your breakfast cold. The fire is awake by now. It breathes. It growls. And you, the poor fool, keep feeding it. By mid-morning, the air inside the forge is syrup thick. Sweat has soaked into every thread of your tunic. Your face is slick. Your neck itches. Your chest is steaming like a pot of boiled bones. Your shirt sticks to your ribs. Your palms slip on the hammer. The coals spit sparks like angry gods every time you open the hatch. The anvil rings with each strike, a loud punishing music that drowns out thought. You fall into rhythm, strike, turn, strike, quench, repeat. Outside the world exists. Inside there is only you and the iron. Then come the visitors. A kid with a snapped belt buckle. A baker with a bent oven grate. A priest who wants the church bell clapper filed down because it's a bit too enthusiastic on feast days. Every one of them starts with "I know you're busy," but you don't have time for any of them. You take their things anyway. Some drop coins, some promise eggs. One leaves behind a single turnip slightly squashed, but a turnip nonetheless. You toss it into the corner right next to the mouldy cheese wedge from last week. Your payment pile. At one point you black out for half a second from standing up too fast. You don't sit. Sitting breaks momentum. You down water from a tin cup still warm from forge heat. It tastes of ash and metal. Perfect. By late afternoon the forge smells of everything except metal, sweat, grease, leather, burnt hair yours. You accidentally singed your forearm while pulling a blade from the coals. You don't bother with bandages. You wrap it in a rag and keep going. The blade's for a young farmhand. He said his old knife just gave up on life. When he comes to collect it, you hand it over still warm. He grins. Then he pulls something from under his cloak. A rabbit. Stiff, gutted, not fresh, not spoiled. Didn't know what else to pay you with. He shrugs. You nod. The rabbit joins the turnip. You might eat it, might not. But it's yours, and that's the point. The sun dips behind the trees. You finish a final horseshoe, then kill the fire. The forge doesn't go quiet. It settles like a bear lying down, still hot, still dangerous. You sweep with a scorched broom that's missing half its bristles. You hang your tools in the exact same places you've always hung them, not because it's tidy, but because your hands will find them by instinct tomorrow, and God help you if they're not there. Your shirt is soaked. Your arms are blackened. You smell like a battlefield and a barn had a baby. You don't even take your boots off when you walk back into the house. Your wife looks up from shelling beans. She doesn't flinch. Doesn't comment on the burn or the stink or the rabbit dangling from your hand. She just says, "Put it by the door, I'll deal with it later." You grunt. Sit on the floor, not because it's more comfortable, but because you trust it. Wood creaks above you as she moves around the room. Quiet. Efficient. She sets a bowl next to your knee. More porridge. You eat it. Still no salt. Still warm. You finish it in 3 bites. She hands you a damp cloth. You wipe your face with it. The cloth turns black. You keep wiping. Night falls. You drag yourself into bed. Your hands still smell of iron. Your back screams. She climbs in beside you, doesn't speak. Just exhales long and low like she too is cooling down from her own forge of chores and cow shit. Neither of you say goodnight. You just lie there, heat radiating from your skin, hearing the hiss of your own breath, still tasting soot between your teeth. And right before sleep takes you, you think, I finished 6 things. Got paid in rabbit, burned my arm, didn't die. That's a good day. You're not a soldier. You don't know how to hold a sword right. While others were learning formation drills, you were hammering out horseshoes. But when war comes, your forge burns like it's got a soul. Other folks curse at the first whisper of invasion, hoarding grain, hiding daughters, boarding windows. You oil the bellows, sharpen your chisels, stack your rivets like you're preparing an altar. Because you know any minute now someone's going to knock. That knock, heavy, urgent. Could be one of the Lord's men. Could be the Lord himself. They won't waste time with greetings. They'll drop a shattered shield at your door and say, 3 more like this, by sunrise. And you feel your chest rise like the fire just took its first breath. You never admit it out loud, not even to yourself. But the truth is, being needed that badly does something to a man. When war looms, the air in your forge changes. The hammer rings louder, the steel sings different. It's not just metal anymore, it's purpose glowing red. You forge arrowheads, by the hundreds, laid out in rows like wheat. You don't see where they land. You just imagine one pierces a belly, one stops a raider. Either way, it buys you another week with meat in the stew pot. You forge swords. The hiss when they hit the quench tank, it sounds like breath, like something alive just happened. You don't picture the man who'll hold it. You picture dinner. Because every extra day of war means another night of fire, another bowl of soup with something more than turnip in it, another evening where your wife doesn't ask if there's flour left. You don't take pride in death. You take pride in being chosen to equip the living. No one knows your name, but they know the road to your forge. They know the smoke. They know if they want conquest, they come here first, through your door, through your hands, through the roar of a hammer that doesn't know how to rest. And when a soldier marches out with one of your blades on his hip, it still carries the warmth of your fire. You used to think of yourself as background. But war taught you otherwise. You're not the shadow, you're the floor. The surface, everything must pass over, uncelebrated. But if you vanished, the whole thing collapses. So no, you don't want peace. Not really. Not for you. When they declare a truce, your hands feel useless. And the kitchen goes quiet in a way that makes your wife stare longer at the soup than at you. One day, your body will quit on you. Your back folds like a gate hinge cracked in winter. Your shoulders sag like bellows left out in the rain. Your hands, once welded to the hammer, now struggle to lift a spoon. And the strangest part, you don't hate it. You almost love it. You love the ache. Love the creak of bone like old floorboards in a church. Love the burnt crust of soup after work because at least you had something to burn. You used to think all this hammering, all this fire, it had to be worth two things. A decent meal and a good night's sleep. Wrong. In the life of a medieval blacksmith, rest and food are luxuries, not guarantees. You eat standing up, one hand gripping your tongs, the other shielding your bread from flying ash. The bread's dry, the soup's yesterday's soup, and if you're lucky, there's a strip of salted meat. Hint you're not lucky. You don't eat to enjoy. You eat to not pass out. Sleep. Sleep is a cruel joke. A twitch behind your eyelids while your knees argue with your spine. The mattress is straw. The blanket is wool soaked in 10 years of smoke and regrets. Your ears still ring from steel on steel. Your hands spasm mid-dream. And the second you begin to fade out, your brain hisses. You forgot the gate latch. You forgot to bill the baker. The noble sword isn't done. Sleep becomes a negotiation. You roll over once, twice, and wonder how many hours you've got left before someone bangs on the door yelling, "The horse lost a shoe, fix it before dawn." Because of course. Who needs rest when the world is broken and you're the glue? You survive on scraps. You nap in fragments. You get by on the unreasonable stubbornness of your own heartbeat. In your world, productivity outranks nutrition. Deadlines outrank dreams. Meals and sleep are just the brief pauses between hammer swings. You eat when you can, sleep if you're allowed, and pray the fire doesn't die while you're dreaming. Your hands weren't always like this. Once they were soft. Maybe when you were 5. Maybe before the first burn. Now, your fingers are tools. Stiff, swollen, cracked. They only feel things when it hurts. You can't write, can't tie a bootlace properly. But you can grip a glowing hot pair of tongs with the calm of someone who's been burned so often. Pain just means still alive. Each knuckle snaps when you flex. Each palm looks like a topographic map of old mistakes. Want to know what season it is? Count the blisters. More than 5 must be summer. You've lost fingernails. Multiple times. Some quietly, some not. Once you smashed your thumb so badly it turned black for 2 weeks. Did you stop working? No. You kept hammering. Not because you're brave, but because what else would you do? This is the work. This is the rhythm. This is the only heartbeat you trust. And then when your heart finally slows like a forge cooling in twilight, your son picks up the hammer. He's not strong yet, not precise, but he holds it steady. And that's enough. You leave behind no land, no title, no phrase carved in stone. Just a wooden box, some tools still warm with memory, and a forge that hasn't gone cold. No one sings about you, no one writes ballads about tongs and rivets. But every blade that holds its edge, every hinge that doesn't groan, every stable door that doesn't collapse on the ox, that's you. They walk past your forge, see smoke, smell iron and sweat, and think nothing important. But inside was a symphony of fire and force of creation and decay. You didn't just forge metal, you forged civilization. Nail by nail, blade by blade, joint by joint. And now, long after your hands have stopped moving, the forge still burns. Your son wields the hammer. Your grandson learns to live with heat. Your name might fade, but the things you made pass from palm to palm, generation to generation. You never wore a crown, never held court, never gave speeches. But without you, nothing moves. No wheels, no armies, no rooftops. You were the flaw beneath history, the ember under the story, the iron thread no one noticed but which kept everything stitched together. And that is more than enough. Because in a world built of wood, stone and sheer will you were the fire, the quiet defiant heat that turned raw ore into progress. You weren't part of the world, you kept it turning.